Today we're going to talk about the mass media and really the role that media plays in politics today. So our goals are to explain how the various forms of mass media are used to shape the political arena, to describe the goals of the mass media, and to explain the concept of media bias and list examples of this bias. So let's begin with what I think is a clever cartoon. We have the first written word, then we have movable type, mass production, email, Twitter, and then 140 characters or less. And so it's funny how we go from little to a lot back to a little. Looking at media, I have a question for you. How do you learn about the news? So when you figure out the news, how do you learn about it? And I want you to explain your answer. We took a look at where you get your media from. Some of you probably said newspaper, radio, internet, family or friends, local news on television, or national news on television. Local news would be like 2, 4, and 7. National news would be CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC. So if we take a look at this, what we're going to look at is the changing role of media in society. In 1994, 72% of Americans were getting their news from television, with only 2% actually getting their news from the internet. By 2004, that number skyrocketed to 29% from online news, whereas the number for TV dropped down to 60%. So we can see more and more people are relying on the internet and other sources for their media versus typical TV, newspaper, and radio. This shows us kind of the same thing. If we look at the Americans getting news on campaigns, 48% got their campaign news from local news in the year 2000. That number shrunk to 40% by 2008. On the other hand, internet was only 9% in 2000, but up to 24% by 2008. So more and more Americans are turning towards the internet. And again, we see a graph that shows us the same thing. Daily news paper going down. Nightly news networks going down, but online going up. In 2017, millennials were asked where do they get their news from, and 62% of people said websites, 30% social media, 58% television. So a lot of people still going for TV, but again, much more people turning to social media and turning to websites. Of course, on this, they had more than one choice, but you can see a lot of people turning to the internet for their media. And as much as people are turning to the internet towards their media, we also find that people are not trusting the news nearly as much as they used to. In 1985, only 10% of people, 15% of people mistrusted CNN. By today, that number went up to almost 30%, and we can see the same trends with almost every other major news outlet out there. So we find that even though people are consuming more news, they don't tend to trust the news that they get. When we asked millennials what they trust, 49% said CNN, 40% Fox News, 39% ABC. You can sort of read the rest for yourself. I think it's funny, 15% of people don't trust anybody for their news. When it comes to websites, again, CNN, New York Times, Fox News tend to be the most trusted out there. Huffington Post, Washington Post, and 18% of people don't trust anything. And so it gives you an idea of where people sort of your age and a little bit older than you are getting their news from. So let's take a look at the goals of the media. What is the goal of the media? And media is there to get viewers. Why do they want viewers? No, not because they care if you watch or not. They want viewers because they want money. Viewers means that they can sell more commercials, and more commercials means they want more money. And it's important to keep this in mind when we think about what we see on TV. When whatever channel it is or whatever internet source you go to broadcast the news, it's really important that you actually look at what they're broadcasting and why they're broadcasting it. Media, let's be honest, is more about entertainment because that will get you to watch. Some of the really cool political stories usually don't get broadcast as much on the news because they sometimes aren't as flashy or as glittery as some of the entertainment stories. And so a lot of times we'll see the media try to sensationalize the news because they want you to watch. They want you to turn it on. They tend to exaggerate. If you notice, every time you turn on the news, everything is breaking news, breaking news. I read an article the other day. Breaking news, the Titanic sunk over 100 years ago. Is that really breaking news? No, but of course the headline got people to read. When we look at the goal of the media and what the media does, the media is there to interact with the public agenda, that is to influence public policy. The media is a watchdog. We talked about this before. The idea is to look over the politicians and make sure that they're following the Constitution, especially the First Amendment. And most important, they're there to shape the public agenda. Note that they don't set the public agenda, but they play a very, very, very important role in shaping the public agenda, shaping what it is that you're thinking about. And this is called the signaling role. The media doesn't tell you what to think, but they do tell you what to think about. They don't ever tell you what to think, but they tell you what to think about. And the signaling role is important. You only know it's important because the media chooses to report on it, unless you do a lot of research on your own. And so it's important to understand that the way we see the world is often shaped by what we see on the media. Even the issues that become important to us are the issues that the media is in many cases picking up. When we think about public policy, we've talked about politicians as making public policy, all the things the government does or doesn't do. Media is not there to make public policy. They are not there to implement public policy, but they are there to evaluate public policy. So it is the job of the media to look at the politicians and see, is what they did effective? Are the new policies put in place working, or does something else need to be done? And again, they will shape how you feel about various different issues. One of the most contentious issues in media is the issue of media bias. Is there a slant to the media you watch? And hopefully you know the answer is yes. Just because you see it on TV or read about it on the internet doesn't make it true. All media sources put what they call a spin on their reporting. They have some type of bias on their reporting. And so if we talk about spin, spin is the deliberate stating of information about a person or an event in an attempt to influence public opinion. Again, not everything is portrayed neutrally in the news. Here's a sample of spin. We have one newspaper reporting that Bush won the election by 51%. The same newspaper, only 4 years later, in the next election, reported Obama wins 52%. The country is united. Is there really a huge difference between 51 or 52%? Not really, but they chose to put some spin on it. They chose to put some bias on it. When Bush won, the publisher of the newspaper wasn't happy. When Obama won, they were. Here's a more recent example by a writer from the New York Times. On 5/15/2009, he reported that President Obama was going to replace U.S. attorneys, and he reported when the Trump team did the exact same thing. On 2017, he reported that Trump team ousted Obama appointed U.S. attorneys. Now, the action is the same. The president fired the attorneys to bring in his own people, but you can see that the headline in story number 2 was much more critical. That is spin. That is bias. Fake news. Today we hear more and more about fake news, so we should probably take a second to look at what exactly is fake news.
How do you know what's happening in your world? The amount of information just a click away may be limitless, but the time and energy we have to absorb and evaluate it is not. All the information in the world won't be very useful unless you know how to read the news. To your grandparents, parents, or even older siblings, this idea would have sounded strange. Only a few decades ago, news was broad-based. Your choices were limited to a couple of general interest magazines and newspapers of record, and 3 or 4 TV networks, where trusted newscasters delivered the day's news at the same reliable time every evening. But the problems with this system soon became apparent as mass media spread. While it was known that authoritarian countries controlled and censored information, a series of scandals showed that democratic governments were also misleading the public, often with media cooperation. Revelations of covert wars, secret assassinations, and political corruption undermined public faith in official narratives presented by mainstream sources. This breakdown of trust in media gatekeepers led to alternative newspapers, radio shows, and cable news competing with the major outlets and covering events from various perspectives. More recently, the internet has multiplied the amount of information and viewpoints, with social media, blogs, and online video turning every citizen into a potential reporter. But if everyone is a reporter, nobody is, and different sources may disagree not only on opinions, but on the facts themselves. So how do you get the truth, or something close? One of the best ways is to get the original news unfiltered by middlemen. Instead of articles interpreting a scientific study or a politician's speech, you can often find the actual material and judge for yourself. For current events, follow reporters on social media. During major events such as the Arab Spring or the Ukrainian protests, newscasters and bloggers have posted updates and recordings from the midst of the chaos. Though many of these later appear in articles or broadcasts, keep in mind that these polished versions often combine the voice of the person who was there with the input of editors who weren't. At the same time, the more chaotic the story, the less you should try to follow it in real time. In events like terrorist attacks and natural disasters, today's media attempts continuous coverage even when no reliable new information is available, sometimes leading to incorrect information or false accusations of innocent people. It's easy to be anxious in such events, but try checking for the latest information at several points in the day rather than every few minutes, allowing time for complete details to emerge and false reports to be refuted. While good journalism aims for objectivity, media bias is often unavoidable. When you can't get the direct story, read coverage in multiple outlets, which employ different reporters and interview different experts. Tuning into various sources and noting the differences lets you put the pieces together for a more complete picture. It's also crucial to separate fact from opinion. Words like think, likely, or probably mean that the outlet is being careful, or worse, taking a guess. And watch out for reports that rely on anonymous sources. These could be people who have little connection to the story, or have an interest in influencing coverage, their anonymity making them unaccountable for the information they provide. Finally, and most importantly, try to verify news before spreading it. While social media has enabled the truth to reach us faster, it's also allowed rumors to spread before they can be verified, and falsehoods to survive long after they've been refuted. So before you share that unbelievable or outrageous news item, do a web search to find any additional information or context you might have missed, and what others are saying about it. Today, we are more free than ever from the old media gatekeepers who used to control the flow of information. But with freedom comes responsibility. The responsibility to curate our own experience and ensure that this flow does not become a flood, leaving us less informed than before we took the plunge.
So, as you can see, not all news is created equal, and depending on what source you get, some news may be fake, and it's important for you to distinguish on your own and figure out what actually is fake and try to verify it with several different sources. Each news station has a different bias to it, and news stations tend to report stories from a point of view that will appeal to their viewers. So, for example, 52% of all viewers of Fox News are conservative. So Fox News naturally is going to put more of a conservative slant on most of what they show. Just the opposite could be said of MSNBC News. The chart is not up here, but MSNBC is probably about 50 to 52% liberal viewers, and so they're going to put a liberal spin on their news. And so that's important to keep in mind when you're watching news. Even somebody like CNN that claims to be pretty fair and balanced, while they do maybe a better job than Fox News and MSNBC News, they are still trying to appeal to a particular audience. They're still trying to appeal to their viewers, and it's important to know that every single media station has an agenda. If you were watching coverage during the Trump election and you were seeing the results come in on some of these stations as President Trump had won the election or it was becoming obvious that he was going to win, you could see the look of anguish on the faces of some of the more liberal TV commentators, and they look, quite frankly, pretty upset. So if we want to take a look at media bias, we can actually go through the political continuum Generally speaking, the radical news station tends to be MSNBC. The liberal news station tends to be MSNBC and CNN. Conservative news station tends to be Fox News and CNN. And reactionary news station generally tends to be Fox News. So what this tells us is the more to the right we move, we have Fox News, the more to the left, MSNBC News, and somewhere in the middle is CNN, although even they are not perfectly objective. It would be difficult to call them a moderate because they do lean towards certain sides on each issue. Perhaps the only truly moderate station out there is C-SPAN. And why is C-SPAN truly moderate? Because they don't put spin on anything. They simply report the news as it's happening. And quite honestly, that's why C-SPAN sometimes is boring, because there is no commentary. They just flat out show what's going on in Congress and leave you to decide. So if you want to avoid all the bias, watch C-SPAN. Perceptions of different news networks. When we look at how many of the news stations covered the election of 2004 between Bush and Kerry, we can see that Fox covered Bush 45% of their coverage was positive, only 17% of their Kerry coverage was positive. On the other side, we've got NBC, only 28% of their coverage of Bush was positive, while 51% of Kerry was positive. So again, we can see the bias in the media. So when it comes to reporting the news, a lot of what gets reported are what are known as soundbites. It's superficial news. It's not the true story. News wants to tell a really quick version of the story, and so a president or a candidate or somebody could give a speech for hours and hours and hours, but the news is really only going to report on a very short segment of it, and that number keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And those little short clips are known as soundbites. They're quick little 5, 10, 15-second clips that are designed more to entertain than they are to actually tell a story. So for example, in the 1968 election, 43.1 seconds of news coverage was given to a candidate, while in 2004 that number dropped to 7.8 seconds. What this means is more and more TV networks are spending less time on the candidates and more time on the clever little things that they say in their speeches. One of the problems with this is that it only covers a little teeny bit of what is actually going on. It doesn't really tell us the true story of what's going on or what politicians think or feel. It just covers a very little clip, which may entertain us, but it really doesn't do much to inform us. So as we cut down on the amount of coverage of actual substance in favor of quick little sound bites, we sort of lose some of the important things, the important parts of our daily news coverage. We're pretty lucky in America that we have more mass media than almost any other country in the world. 270 million people in the United States, and out of them we have about 776 TVs per 1,000 people, over 2,000 radios per person, and over 238 newspapers per 1,000 people. And that is a pretty substantial number compared to most other countries in the world, but even sometimes this can be overwhelming. With so many sources out there, you might not even know where to turn to, and you may just get fed up and not actually look at any media. So that's all we've got for now. What we're going to focus our next lesson on is a little bit more about how candidates actually use the media. So we've talked about what the media is and how the media functions. Now we're going to talk about how the candidates use the media to get their way. Because as much as we've talked about media using the candidates aren't stupid either. They know what the media is doing. So more on that with our next lesson.